But first, as you know, I'm rather fond of the concept that is the triangle of dependence. Put simply, how does the Labor Party stay in power? How does it find a way to go from being the government to the party of government, where no one would ever think about changing the system? Well, if the majority of the people currently get welfare from government, tick, that's what's happening. If a significant number of people work for the government, tick, or billions of dollars in business where the federal government is your biggest client, for example, say Optus has got more than $1 billion worth of government contracts, nobody rocks the boat. And on the employment side of the triangle, we learned today via the Bureau of Statistics about just how big the Australian public service is, but not just at the federal level, at all potential levels. The ABS today, again, put out the numbers and they read as this. There are 385,000 people who work for the Commonwealth Public Service. That is up by more than a football stadium of people in just 1 year. At the state level, 1.9 million people get their wage from the government. Now, yes, at that level, we're talking about teachers and cops, but still 1.9 million people around the country, in a country of 27 million, where only about 16 million are voting. And unbelievably, there are 218,000 people who actually work for local government. Now, that too has gone up by 7,500. So, at the federal level, up by a football stadium, an even bigger football stadium at the state government, and almost sort of a new suburb worth of people at the local level. All of this costs money. It costs $40 billion, B4 billion dollars, to pay for the public servants at the Commonwealth level. That's up by $3.5 billion in just 1 year. It's $191 billion at the state level. That's up by $13 billion. And as you can see, unbelievably, $17 billion is spent by the local councils of this country employing the people who work for local councils, including, as we showed you before, many of the people who run the councils who earn more money than state or federal MPs. That is up by $1 billion. That's what I talk about when I talk about the triangle of dependence. And every time they turn up the welfare dial, where now almost 40% of the federal budget is handed out on welfare, and if they keep employing, then any suggestions about limiting the number of people being employed, or God forbid, actually cutting that a little bit, well, that's mass panic. And nobody wants to upset the government. So when it comes to this federal government, part of their culture of secrecy is that even if you're a business dealing with the government, you have to sign an NDA to talk about the negotiations. That's the triangle of dependence. That's how Labor stays in power for a very long time. They did it and continue to do it in Victoria, so much so that there is very little chance of a change of government there, no matter how many failures that there have been. It's the same now in Western Australia, when that Labor government has produced some horrible results, including the bloke who helped ruin the hospital system was eventually rewarded and became the Premier. Now, there are new governments in Queensland and South Australia, and even sometimes when it's a Liberal government, they all still follow this theory. And of course, all of that has to be paid for. All of it has to be paid for by state budgets, all of which are in deficit, a federal budget, which is in $1 trillion worth of debt. So yeah, I'm going to keep talking about it, because I'm going to show you every chance I get about how Labor gets what it wants, how the triangle works and how the triangle gets stronger as a result of Labor governments reinforcing what will eventually be more than 50% of the Australian population. And then, unless you are going to be some version of Labor Light, and I'm not arguing for Labor Light, but unless you're willing to also agree to increase the size of the triangle, you're not going to get a chance to win, ever. Now, as you have heard, the Liberals are about to make their decision when it comes to net zero. Now, it's pretty obvious which way this thing is going to go for a whole collection of different reasons, but the news broke this afternoon that they are going to go through a process. Now, presumably they could have had a vote this week, and everyone who will believe what they believe at the end of the process will believe what they believe at the beginning of the process. But here is Trudy McIntosh explaining it from our Canberra bureau. She was first with the news, and well done to her.
Got the timeline here of when the Liberals and the Coalition potentially could finally reach this position on net zero. MPs will be recalled back to Parliament, Liberal ones, next Wednesday for this special party room meeting, Wednesday at midnight, to discuss a set of principles for their endorsement when it comes to the energy policy. They'll be able to ask questions, Dan Tehan there, and also the federal director of the party with a briefing on what the research is telling them. The following day, the Thursday at 9 a.m, there'll be a full Liberal shadow ministry meeting to lock in the Liberal position. From there, 3 representatives from the Libs, 3 from the Nationals will be meeting over the course of a few days to try and find a consensus within the coalition when it comes to net zero. Then finally, Sunday the 16th, there'll be a virtual joint party room meeting to endorse or potentially not endorse what is that consensus position.
Now, I understand the process, but one of the problems with process is that next week you will virtually hear from no one in the government. The obsession of the 6 p.m. news and all of the people who talk about politics for a living is going to be about the Liberal Party process. And we're going to hear this one who wants to go this way and this one who wants to go that way. And essentially, the entire process, and just like putting legislation together, is like putting a sausage together. No one wants to see the ingredients. All of it will be on ugly display for an entire week. And again, the resolution does not happen by the end of the week. There is the potential of the whole thing blowing up, not this Sunday, but next Sunday. This is exactly what the government wants. Now, I know that probably the majority of people watching right now, they would agree. They would want the coalition to drop net zero for a whole bunch of reasons that have been well argued by people far smarter than me, and you understand that I don't believe that where the government is going is exactly the place we have to be. But when this process is going to play out, how this process is going to play out, the Labor Party is going to do this every single day. And it doesn't matter how big the lie is, it will be echoed in the press, not just for a week, but for more than a week.
So while the Liberals and the Nationals are obsessed with their internal arguments over net zero, they've got net zero to say when it comes to skilling Australians for the jobs of the future.
We accept the views of 97% of the world's scientists. The LNP appears to think they know better.
They are divided, they are divisive, they are delusional, and that's why they're in disarray.
And in abandoning net zero, the National Party has betrayed regional Australia.
Now, as we know, the Nats have already made their decision, and I pointed out to you on Sunday night when they made the decision, it was really important to remember that part of their decision of getting rid of net zero wasn't climate change doesn't exist, don't need to do anything about it. Now, that is the central lie that the Labor Party and the left and the media will focus on, because the Prime Minister has distilled it down to an absurd point, which is unless you believe in net zero by 2050, you don't believe in climate change. Well, of course, the reality is that Australia is 1% of the world's problem. So even if we get there by 2050, China, that can pump into the air what we do, they can in 2 weeks what we do in an entire year. Their net zero doesn't kick in until 2060. The Paris Agreement, which locks countries like Australia into 2030, does not apply to countries like China because, of course, they're developing nations. Despite the fact that they've got a space station, the United States is out of it, India, Russia, not doing much, and the third world, because they're developing countries, basically half of the world, none of the rules apply. But in Australia, the reality of politics, and every single poll that all of us have seen before the last election and after the last election, is that there is a threshold to entry, which is that in Australia, every party needs to have some position about how to deal with climate change. Now, the absurd position is that Australia can single-handedly fix it. Or even if we do, every single thing that is a green dream, we will be able to fix the climate that 99% of the rest of the globe is also sending our way. But the political reality is that if they decide to get rid of net zero by 2050 because they believe it is too onerous, too expensive, and it's causing trouble, again, fine, fair enough, let's have the debate, let's have the argument. The people who believe that passionately say that the majority of Australians can be turned on to that argument because that argument has been won in the past. Again, I am not disputing this as a political point. And difference in politics really matters. But. One thing that cannot be the result of this process is for the Liberal Party to say, nah, when it comes to climate change. Now, Ross Goodell, who's the bloke who helped convince the National Party through his reporting and the evidence to get to the no net zero, well, we'll have a chat with him a little bit later tonight because, again, I want to dig a little deeper. And while very few people outside of the conversation we're going to have here will actually hear it, remember the National Party position may be no to net zero, but it still has a climate position, which is we need to cut emissions. We just don't need to cut them at the same speed when bigger polluters are not cut. Fine. My suggestion is that during this week-long process, if the Libs are going to get rid of net zero, then they have to come up with a couple of concrete examples of what are the types of things that they would do to deal with it. Not to solve climate change, because Australia can't, but how to deal with it. Are they going to have a policy that's going to help people feel better that live in areas where you can't afford your insurance because of flood and fire? Because insurance companies believe really wildly we've got to do something about net zero or somehow premiums keep going up. I'll break the news to you, kids. They're always going to put premiums up because that's what they do. What about coming up with a system about greater resilience? Why not employ, I think it's Jackie Lambie's idea, which is some sort of, not quite the army, but not quite the SES, some sort of standing service that is able to respond to natural disasters. What about promising to plant 1 billion trees? To me, the slogan is just the slogan, but the slogan is also backed in by law that the Senate would have to overturn. And in the same way the Senate would not overturn a ban on even having a look into nuclear energy, they would not pass a bill that would let us off the commitments of this current government until the numbers in the Senate change. That's the political reality. Now, you've got most of the media, most of the establishment, most of business that seems to be fine with what the government is doing. The chance here is the majority of the Australian population onto the idea that even if we do everything that they want to do, it doesn't actually move the dial. And bizarrely, when you say that, you're referred to as a climate change denier. Have you heard anything in what I've just had to say that appears anywhere to be a climate change denier? No, I'm a climate change realist. Which is, can you have 7 billion people on the planet and not change the planet? No. Can you have multiple industrial revolutions and not change the planet? No. But are we all going to die next week unless the first world gives half of its money to the third world? No. Is Australia going to be able to stop? And remember, no politician is dumb enough to stand up and say, if we do everything I say we should do, despite the fact that I say the reason we should do it is because of flood and fire, not one of them promises a reduction in flood and fire. So if we're going to go for this for a week and you're going to lose all the bark they're going to lose this week, I hope that if they get to the position, which seems to be the obvious one now, which is they're going to get rid of net zero, for God's sake, by next Sunday, I apologise, I know people don't like when I blaspheme, but still, for goodness sake, next Sunday, not this one, the next Sunday, they have to be able to answer the question, if a random person walked up to them in the street and say, so what is your position when it comes to climate change? What are you going to do to fix it? What are you going to do to make sure that we can live with it and through it? Send the hate mail to somebody else. I'm just being a realist, right? Look at the scoreboard of the past couple of elections. And I desperately want those scoreboards to look very, very differently. But every poll, every piece of information says people under the age of 50, this is right at the tippy top. So even if you don't have the solution that they may wish to vote for, you still have to have a solution, or guess what? They will never preference you. And as the primary vote of both major parties keeps going down, preferences matter. Now, question time today. And I know a couple of people are a bit critical of this, and that's cool, but I liked that there was some front-loading today in the Parliament talking about the hunger report. Now, every single person you can see right there, except for the public gallery, they've all got 3 pay rises since the 2022 election. These people are earning more money than they've ever earned in their life. And yes, they all sit there and pretend that they, care about the little people, and I have no doubt in their heart of hearts they do. I actually think that even the people I mostly deeply disagree with, I still consider them to be fundamentally decent, and nobody gets up wanting to make the world worse. But the reality is that Australia is worse at the moment, and it is worse because there are a lot of people around the country who run out of food each and every week. This is not cool. This is not cool in a country where so many of us pay so much tax, so many of us have got it so good. So many of us will, of course, spoil our family and friends between now and Christmas. And I'm not saying you have to cut back on any of this. But we've also got a government that's willing to find $1 billion to host a climate change conference that's so important the Prime Minister won't be attending this year's one and didn't appear at last year's one and didn't appear at the one before that, but it's still really important and we need to spend $1 billion. This is really sad reading, and I've been doing a lot of it in the past 24 hours, and it is that hunger report put together by the people at Food Bank. And I've got the feeling that this organisation is in some ways being actively punished because people like myself, or maybe because it's myself, talk constantly about the horror that this report actually is in. And if me shutting up somehow resulted in extra money, then guess what? Zip. But this report is even worse than what I told you last night. 1 in 3 Australian households, that's nearly 3.5 million, experience food insecurity in the past 12 months. That means at some point they didn't know where the meals were going to come from. And I know that there's a lot of things that are bad about the opposition at the moment tactically, but I like the question that was asked because it's important. And it's not going to change election results and it's not going to move the 6 p.m. news, but for goodness sake, can there be just a little bit of pressure somewhere, someone trying to put pressure on the government that's got all the money in the world and is willing to borrow all the other money in the world when they consider something to be important, to do something about this issue, which I think is more important than many.
Foodbank's 2025 Hunger Report shockingly reveals that 20% of Australian households are severely food insecure and that parents are skipping meals so that their kids can eat. Prime Minister, why are more Australians going hungry under Labor?
And amazingly, the arrogance of the Prime Minister is that this is how he answered the question. Now, this bloke became the Prime Minister in part because Australians bought into his story. One about Housing Commission, one about not having an awful lot of money, and now he's a person who has lived, by his own description, as a difficult youth, who's in a position to be able to do something to flood the zone to make sure that the people who are covered by this report, who are the recipients of the care of people like Food Bank, that his response is just not even to use the word.
The modern Liberal Party is not so much a broad church these days as a temple of doom. They talk everything down each and every day. They vote against every single cost of living measure that we put in place. They argue that opposing tax cuts somehow doesn't make a difference to the capacity of people to get by. They argue that cheaper medicines won't assist people to get the health care that they need. They argue that free TAFE is something that people don't value.
Just compare the pair, right? This report, Food Bank is not some right-wing organisation. I think one of its current bosses is literally a former Teal in the federal parliament. In New South Wales, people like John Robertson, a lifelong union man and former Labor leader. But compassion doesn't have to be just something for the left. Same as strength isn't something automatically for the right. This is just a flare that goes up that there are people that are struggling. And the Prime Minister doesn't even engage with the thing they are struggling with. In fact, this report even goes to some length to turn around and say, yeah, thanks for all the other stuff, but guess what? It actually hasn't moved the needle on freeing up the money so they can feed their family. There's a little more I want to add to the quote that I just read you. 1 in 3 Australian households, nearly 3.5 million, experience food insecurity in the past 12 months. This is an increase from last year's results. Despite targeted government efforts such as one-off energy bill subsidies, cost of living remains the number one concern of 87% of households who are dealing with Food Bank. It jumps to 91% for the families who have this food insecurity. They're also increasingly concerned about the cost of healthcare, which is up at 4% at the same time. So I'm not above begging and pleading for those who have access to the funds to open them up to help the charities around Australia that are the ones filling the gap between an American-style system of homelessness and hunger and the government-funded social safety net that means we have things like unemployment benefits and carers' pensions. I do not, for the life of me, see that some people can be so dipped in politics that because the question is coming from the side they don't agree with, they won't give them a win, which means don't give extra money to these resources. Don't even pretend that there is a flare in the air that tells us that many people are struggling. I know it's a repetitive point to make, but what other point is there to make? That when your fellow citizen is struggling and you are in a position to be able to advocate for them and you are in a position, Prime Minister, ministers, Labor MPs, to be able to actually help, but you don't because somehow it'll be a win for Team Blue. Again, it's not about that. And if you think this stuff is sort of wishy-washy, sooky, bleeding heart stuff, again, compassion is not just for the left, it is for everyone. Strength is not just for the right, it is for everyone. Decency is obvious. And I'm not haranguing you saying that you have to empty your bank account to give to those who don't have, okay? We don't live in that world. But to me, this is beyond common sense, and we are into a matter of decency. And again, can I plead to any and everyone who has the chance to start asking questions about this to please ask questions, not to create political pressure, so Labor gets an L and the Libs get a win so that the people who are hurting get a win. Because I thought we were in a joint that cared about that. I really do, and I still believe in it, and that's why I mention it as frequently and as often as and repetitively as I do, because they don't have access to a microphone. Speaking of, to our mates who are concerned about the world of aged care, I've been meaning to get this for a few days, but this is a frightening story. And it is here that we know that Australians having to wait longer to be assessed when it comes to aged care, having to wait longer to be able to get home packages, to be able to stay in your homes. This is more problems that exist with the aged care system. And never forget, the minister who prances around pretending to punish Optus, and I don't carry water for Optus, was the aged care minister. She stood there side by side with the Prime Minister pretending that everything was going to be fixed. What about this story from the Herald Sun a couple of days ago? Older Aussies feel better off dead compared to life under the new Aged Care Act, the one that the previous minister was so important in putting together. Older Australians say they are better off dead after finding out that they would be worse off under the new aged care changes which are coming in on Saturday. They came in last Saturday, due to what feels like a money-grabbing wrought by providers. I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. These are the words from a lady called Judy Williams, who spoke to the Weekend Herald Sun. She's 79. She said that people are so fed up that they are talking about voluntary assisted dying in Facebook discussions. People are going, they just want us to die because if we can't get enough care at home, we're going to end up in hospital, and then we'll block up the hospital beds because there's not a lot of vacancies in residential care. These people are talking about voluntary assisted dying. Now, I'm a person who has supported the establishment of a system for all of us to be able to go gently. And just because one person wants to doesn't mean that everyone has to. And one person's right to say no does not mean somebody else's right to say yes should be taken away. Back to that compassion, that decency thing. But again, what does it say about how indecent the system is, where just this, again, I don't know anything about this lady, other than what I read, but this 79-year-old lady, Judy, is lifting the lid on what is being said in private. That people are thinking about finishing up because of how hard the system is to access for you to be able to live for as long as you can in the best quality of life as you can. Now, we do have a new aged care minister whose responsibility in part is going to have to get on top of this, deal with all of this. But apparently state ministers are not even willing to meet with him because of the problems that are existing in this brand new system. Can someone somewhere wake up? Can somewhere wake up and fix this system? All right, let's talk about electric vehicles. Now, as you know, I'm a petrol head, good old-fashioned cashed-up bogan, and I love cars. And I also know that I don't have a problem with EVs. You want to drive one, good luck to you. I certainly know they're pretty fancy sometimes. I'm not all that interested in the stuff that comes from China, but they go pretty fast, they go pretty good. Some of them look pretty flash. Fine, good, you do what you want to do. Well, guess what? I'm sure this was fun to read in the Sydney Morning Herald's newsroom today, but Australia's electric vehicle revolution stalls. Why? Because the sales have plummeted. In fact, if you have a look, the only major growth is in hybrids or plug-in hybrids. You know, the ones that end up attracting luxury car taxes because of the little fiddles and changes there, but still people want the option to be able to extend their tank of petrol for as long as possible. And again, remember, one of the reasons why perhaps people are not jumping into the EV revolution is because the resale value is not well established yet when it comes to used cars. The retained value reflects how much of a car's value when purchased new is held if it's sold today. For example, 2018 Toyota Hilux, bought it for $80,000, retained 85% of its value, means it's worth about $68,000. Electric cars less than 2 years of age only hold 82% of their original value, and cars that are between 2 and 4 years old shrunk down to just 57%. And older are worth less than 25% of their original value. People will eventually turn around and start buying electric cars when we know what the resale market is. Put simply, that has not been established yet. So don't say that Australians are somehow, bucking the trend, not interested, holding on to their petrol cars. No, because bar your house, the car's one of the most expensive things you'll ever own. And at some point, you're either going to want to trade it in for the next one, or you want it to be able to hold on for as long as possible, so there's a chunk of change at the end of it. That's why people might be holding off right now. In American politics, to refrain upon what has happened there, with the new New York Mayor, Zohran Mamdani. Now, this bloke is just going to be minted now because, of course, he's off the hard left. He's, next gen, all the rest of it, and all the Gen X and even older generations in the American media who are sort of lefties. They want to stay cool, man. So they were talking him and the rest of the Democrats up after what was a great night for that side of politics.
I mean, it's a great day to be a Democrat.
Zohran Mamdani completed an improbable and rather astonishing surge from political anonymity, convincing New York their city could become fairer and more affordable.
As dark as this time is, as challenging as this moment can be, anything is still possible in America.
This was an epic blowout. This was a bloodbath for the Republican
Party.
Pretty
much 100% across the board, or hundo P, as my 18-year-old boys would say. This was like a hundo P night for Democrats.
It did not go the way Democrats had hoped. They went even better. Is this what good news feels? My fingernails are tingling.
And, of course, we now have to put up with the garbage. Remember how they've just denied the existence of Melania Trump? Wouldn't dare put that beautiful woman anywhere near the front cover of a magazine? Well, even in Australia, this is what they are saying about the new New York mayor's wife, a modern-day Princess Diana. As for Trump, he thinks everyone should be nicer to him.
I think he should be very nice to me. I'm the one that sort of has to approve a lot of things coming to him, so he's off to a bad start.
As a Trump fan, as a person who is still buzzing off the victory that he had 12 months ago, the reality is that his popularity has waned in the first few months of his presidency. Now, he's saying that he's making the tough choices that will eventually kick in later. The economy will be even better. But as you can see, on the left of screen is how he started, and how he started was with an approval rating over 50%. The disapproval rating is now higher, and we're sort of very close to a 60-40 scenario. And on one subject in particular, inflation, he's gone from being in front on that issue to now being very much behind. So I join the chorus of others who've said, look, great to have Middle East peace, great to solve wars, great to go for Nobel Peace Prizes, but obviously the reason you were hired was to pull inflation down. Many ways, he has been able to certainly not get it to spike, but at the end of the day, as he was able to bash Biden about the cost of living, someone will eventually try to do to the Republicans. And remember, in 12 months from now is the midterm elections. That's the elections for the Senate and the House of Representatives. And if the Dems do well in those, well, of course, it's immediately a handbrake. He can't pass any legislation because they will be interested in doing nothing. And if the Democrats get control of the House, which they most likely will, because Republicans only currently have a one-seat majority in like a House of 450 MPs or members of the House, well, that, of course, would mean the impeachment process and all of that crap goes on and on and on. So it'll be fascinating to see, but he's got a year to try to move things back in the direction of where things were a year ago. I wish him nothing but the best, and I certainly hope that it happens. All right, before I finish blithering, let me get to another example of, while you worked really hard this week, the politicians worked really hard on their own image, and you also paid for it. Not just because you pay the MPs, but you also pay for the staffers to help them make crap like this on social media. Our old mate, Cara. Another Labor senator. Oh, if it's got Taylor in it, it must be great. And then one more example again about how they turn themselves into social media stars.
6'4" from Kentucky. Welcome to DC, number 2, John.
Please do better next week. Please work harder next week. Please actually do something for people and stop doing what you do.